right. We are just going to dive in. I promise you this is going to be worth it. Sticking around for the next hour or so watching this video. We're going to treat this like a bit of a court case. I'm going to try and explain things as they happen. We're basically putting the company Rainmaker on trial, and we're just going to listen to what the company says. We're going to listen to where they are, where they were in relation to the flood in Texas that happened around um, Kerr County and all the counties in the immediate area. So we're going to be talking about it. And the reason why I, as the Black Swan, are honing in on this is because there's too many coincidences. If you were to poll 100 people, I think most people would say this is a suspicious storm. Why weren't there any warnings given out? The last legit warning was about 1 p.m. on July 3rd. The next warning was at 1 o'clock in the morning on July 4th. At about 4 a.m. to 5 a.m., there were witnesses that said that there was a surge of about 25 to 35 feet. No warning whatsoever. So we're going to ask the question, what happened? And specifically, we're going to watch a video where a gentleman by the name of Jim Lee interviews Rainmaker the day after this stuff all unfolded. And again, if you poll people, they're like, this is suspect. And because I am the Black Swan and I think outside the box, I watched the interview and I'm like, there's something going on here in the interview. And if you haven't watched yesterday's video, that's okay. I would encourage you to watch it after this one, because then maybe it'll make more sense. I spent a lot of time talking about what happens to people when they lie. They start to scratch their nose, they look off to the side, they get fidgety, they get thirsty, they drink lots of water, whatever. And again, this isn't an exact science, because if you're on a podcast, you're going to stumble over things to say. You're going to be thirsty, and I'm thinking about my water upstairs that I left. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about things that people do when they are lying, things that people do when they're trying to protect their corporation, they're trying to downplay something. That's a form of lying as well. Like, for example, if I were to say something like, say I was an investigator and I went into a room and maybe somebody was accidentally unlifed by another person and they actually caught the person. They're like looking around and they see a shotgun and it's all stored away in its proper case. And the FBI guy asks person, did you shoot this person with that shotgun? Did you do that? And the person says, well, I used bullets. So he's not saying he used the shotgun. What he's saying is he used bullets. So he's dodging, he's deflecting. Meanwhile, he had a handgun in his pocket. So just because you ask the wrong question doesn't mean that party is not guilty. It's just you have to find the right way to say it, because some of these people won't cough it up, or they'll cough it up in a different way. And then you're like, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense. Okay. But it's because you didn't ask the right question. So we're going to watch this interview. And again, you might have to watch it again, but I'm going to do my best. I'm not a rocket surgeon. I take this stuff as it comes down the pipeline. I know people are saying it's pike. It's pike. Maybe if you're in the States, it's pike. Up here, it's pipeline. Things are coming down the pipeline so fast, down the pipe, because we're basically a mini Texas. If you want to think about Alberta, we're like a mini Texas. We most of our jobs are in the oil and gas sector. So maybe this is why you guys love us here in Alberta. We're kind of like the Texans, and we have what we call as Calgary Stampede. It's the largest show on earth, and it's rodeos, it's bronco riding, it's bull riding, all this stuff. And I'm gonna go. We're gonna actually go to the Stampede on Saturday night. My sister's flying in, and we're gonna hang out. She bought us tickets, and she asked us a few months ago, "Hey, would you like to go with us?" And I'm like, "Sure, yeah, my wife and I would love to go." So we're gonna go hang out, watch the rodeo, watch the stage show, all that kind of stuff, and that'll be fun. That's what we do here in Calgary. So, all right. So let's get into the goodies here. This is the good stuff. I'm telling you, I promise you, this video will blow you away. I'm telling you, telling you. All right, let's just get right to it, okay? All right, so this is the company owner, Augustus Dorco. He's the owner of Rainmaker, and let me just show you this company right here. This is the company, Rainmaker. Let me make sure you guys can see this. Oh, can't see it. What is going on here? Hang on here. Good thing I looked. What is going on? Why? Oh, I get it. Here we go. It should show up now. There it is. There it is. Let me get rid of this thing here. Okay. So making Earth habitable. This is the company, again, is called Rainmaker. Make it rain. That's their whole company slogan. Rainmaker provides water for farms, watersheds, and ecosystems, fortifying growth and stewarding the natural world. Make it rain. Make it rain. So let's go over to the interview now with Jim Lee, owner of Climate Viewer, who basically has a website. What's it called? Weather Modification. Check out this here. Let me show you this. This is Jim's website. I got so many tabs open. I apologize for that. So this is Weather Modification. Let me see what the actual website is called. So it's called Weather Modification History. So if you want to know anything about weather modification and when it started and all kinds of stuff, geoengineering, man, you have come to the right place. You just go visit this website. If you go to the homepage, Man-Made versus Nature, weathermodificationhistory.com. Go check it out. Go read the articles. There's so many articles going all the way back to the 40s. What's going on, patents, like you name it. Jim has it all here. He spent years, I think the last 10, 15 years, he's got a climate viewer, 3D map, all this kind of stuff, which I'm slowly learning how to work, but I'm not a rocket engineer. So let us go over to the interview, and I think this will blow your mind, and we're going to treat this like a bit of a court case. Let's see. All right. Lots of good questions here. People are saying they should outlaw weather modification, all this stuff. The truth is, they've been doing this stuff since the 40s. We're only hearing about this now. I read an article by Lyndon B. Johnson at a hearing, I believe it was, at the White House, talking about in the 60s. I think it was 1965. He was saying, or 1966. He was saying, actually 65. We need to get a hold of this. Not only for our nation, but for the world. We have to get a hold of this. We have to grasp hold of this idea. There's a couple things that are in our path before we get to weather modification. That is, we need to land on the moon because the Russians are kicking our derriere. And we need to, what was the other thing that we needed to do? Oh, nuclear. We need to harness nuclear energy, atomic energy. We need to be able to control that. Once we get that under our belts, then we can go into the realm of weather modification. This is Lyndon B. Johnson. You can look up his article or watch the video, because I read some of the article the first time I did this video. So yesterday, I think it was. All right, so listen to this video. Basically, Jim is going to ask point blank questions to, I'll just call him Rainmaker. His name is Augustus. I'm just going to say Rainmaker from here on in. And if something comes up, I will pretend I'm like a lawyer and I will say, objection. This is this is what this guy actually really means. Or I will try and explain what he is trying to say. Hopefully this will make sense as we go along. I figured it out in my head, but sometimes it may not come across as crystal clear when you're making a video like this, because I don't have a script. I'm just going to listen to what they say, and then we're going to talk about it as we go. All right, let's go to the video. Let's play it.
Weather warfare ban does not ban any kind of benevolent weather modification or intentional weather modification within your own borders. So countries can do whatever they want as long as their weather doesn't go screwing with some other country. That could cause a lot of conflict. Now, Augustus, he owns a company. How you started up last year, right?
2023.
2023, that's right. And that is available at rainmaker.com. So what Augustus did was he responded to this accusation.
One thing I have to say about Jim Lee, his IQ is off the charts. So don't let his disposition fool you. Don't let his disposition help you think that he is just a mild-mannered, casual guy that's just this is a new subject. This is something new. I've seen him use bait questions when he's interviewing Augustus, and one of the best ways to get someone to sing like a canary is to be their best friend, is to pretend that you're on their side, you're not against them. That's how you extract the most information that you can from a person, from a company, is you say things like, hey, I know I was like this before, but help me explain, help me, like, win me over to your side, because that's how I used to be, but I'm here for you. And I agree with what you're saying. Tell me more about this. And if you paint it that way, you're going to get a lot more information, instead of saying you're a crook, you're an enemy to society. Watch the person clam up. So this is, I think Jim is a mega genius for getting Rainmaker to spill the tea, if you will, on how it works. And so try to ignore Jim from the perspective of, I thought this guy was against this type of thing. Understand he's interviewing, and a good interviewer, a perfect interviewer, gets the person to extract information. That's a gift, and I wish I could be there, because I think sometimes I could have a guest on and I could be argumentative, and that will shut them down. That'll wreck the video. So my goal, if I have a guest on, if I don't agree with them, is to try and extract as much information, obviously without lying or anything like, oh, I'm your best friend or whatever it is. No, but there's a way to do an interview to get people to sing like a canary. And I think Jim did a good job on here. So there will be a little bit of cuss words here and there. Just prepping you. All right, let's continue
here. And, you know, I'm going to throw this in the chat for everybody. You guys can read it yourself. And I'm going to shoot that out to y'all now. All right, there you go. There's the chat link for everybody watching at home. So basically, you want to explain what you got here?
Yeah, sure. So first and foremost, right, like I think it's worth saying what our company is, what we do. Rainmaker is a next-gen cloud seeding company. Our interest is in where there are droughts, where times are too dry and farms are going dry or reservoirs are running out, helping to produce water for those constituencies, farms, ecosystems, utilities, that sort of thing.
Okay. This is good. We're now getting a base of what Rainmaker is supposed to be. Droughts. Makes sense to me. If you have a farm that has no water, then you need a company like this to make it rain. That makes logical sense. What he's not saying is what they also do on the side. Because if he, meaning Rainmaker, if their only job was to help with areas that are under severe drought, then the question becomes, why were you in the area, arguably within 100 miles or so, of Kerrville, of Kerr, the county of Kerr, operating when Tropical Storm Barry just moved through? And when there's rain, there's precipitation, you could see it all over the place. There is no drought in that area. So that's the question. So if that's your company operating only in areas that are droughts where farmers need it, then the question we have to think is, why were you in an area that already had lots of rain, that is not known for being in a drought area, drought region? So think about that, put that on your shelf.
I think that a lot of people, rightfully so, hear about that and think off the jump, well, did you cause flooding? Can you cause flooding?
This is good. This is good, pardon. I'm not, I don't want to cut this off, but I want to ramp people up so that they can listen to what this guy's actually saying. So me have to jump in every once in a while, but I'm telling you, this gets really good. But you have to understand the things that he's saying. He's like, people are saying, rightfully so, can you make it rain? I just read to you his website. We are rainmakers. That's our slogan.
Rainmaker caused flooding in Texas? And first of all, categorically and absolutely no. And we can examine all of the evidence that demonstrates that there was no way that we could have participated in causing any of the flooding there. That said, it was a tragedy that it did happen. And I think there's a lot of things that the country can do differently to try to mitigate disasters like that in the future. And I think there's a lot of things that we can regulate differently so that people have less concerns about weather modification activities writ large. And so in that thread, originally.
Okay, so he just said people have the right to question a company that's modifying the weather. Can we create storms like this one that flooded Kerr? No, absolutely unequivocally no. That's not what we do. Okay, I'm going to hold you to that, Rainmaker. I'm going to hold you to that, and we're going to go through some of the science of how this actually works. So he's saying, no, we could never be responsible, but yet, you know, I wouldn't mind being on the government board that decides how to navigate through this landscape. I wouldn't mind, because I think it's important for countries to know how weather works and how to manipulate weather. So I wouldn't mind being there, but no, we can't do it. Okay, then why do they need you as an expert? Why do they need your voice? Is it because you know how to make it rain like no other?
Originally, somebody asked, can you disclose where you were operating in Texas, what you were doing in Texas, and if you had any impact on the tropical storm Barry that blew through? And again, that storm, just to go through the timeline of events, right?
Okay, so this goes really quick, but basically he just said, did we have any influence on the tropical storm Barry that just blew through and was making its way into Mexico? So he answers almost like a question with a question. He's going down his list of things that people have said. Maybe he has a script there, don't know. But the idea then again is people are accusing him, asking him, where were you on July 4th when the storm hit Kerr County? Where were you? Were you operating on July 4th? Were you operating there? So he explains a little bit of where they were. I'm just going to back it up here.
I think there's a lot of things that we can regulate differently so that people have less concerns about weather modification activities writ large. And so in that thread, originally somebody asked, can you disclose where you were operating in Texas, what you were doing in Texas, and if you had any impact on the tropical storm Barry that blew through. And again, that storm, just to go through the timeline of events, right? The National Weather Service on the 3rd at about 1 a.m, posted a severe flood risk, right? Then the subsequent day at about 4 a.m.
Okay, it goes on, but so write this down if you got notes. July 3rd, 1 a.m, notification, flood warning. Okay, July 3rd. Then he said the next day, 4 a.m, now we have a catastrophe. So a day later, so this is his information. July 3rd, 1 a.m, we're getting a notification of imminent flooding. The next day, 4 a.m, approximately, the flood is here.
They announced that there was a high probability of like life-threatening flooding. That was from the convergence of two different extremely moist systems, one coming up from.
So it wasn't a high probability. It was actually happening at 4 a.m. 20-foot surges, 25, 30-foot surges of water removing cabins is not a high probability. Do you see how he downplays it? At 4 o'clock on July 4th, it was a high probability of a flood. No, it had happened. 1 o'clock on July 4th, they're saying we have a flash flood amongst us, and people were waking up to screaming at midnight, at 1 o'clock, at 2 o'clock in the morning. Campers were missing, all this stuff. So by the time 4 or 5 o'clock, yes, it crescended to about 30 feet. And then after 5 o'clock, it starts to go down. That was the max. So it's rising from about midnight-ish. They said within an hour, within 45 minutes, they had 20, 25-foot swells. This is not a high probability. This is what actually was happening. So he's thrown out 2 times. Continue.
From the Gulf, one coming up from the Pacific. And Rainmaker did not operate on the 3rd, on the 4th. We operated for about 20 minutes, days in advance.
Okay. So out of his own mouth, and I can say from everything that I've seen, when he says they were not operating July 3rd and July 4th, I believe him. I believe that they weren't seeding clouds on July 3rd and July 4th. I believe that they weren't in operations. They weren't operating in Kerrville on July 3rd and July 4th. I believe that. Why? Because it's already happening. But he said we were in operation 2 days before the flood. So if you go July 4th at 1 o'clock in the AM, this is when the flood started. Let's roll that calendar back. July 3rd, he said there was a flood coming, right? He said 1 a.m., July 3rd, 24 hours before. So now he's saying he was in operation a couple of days before the flood, meaning July 2nd is what we want to focus in on. That is our magic day. What were you doing on July 2nd? I don't care what you were doing July 4th. Probably having fun with your family. Don't know, don't care. July 5th, don't care what you're doing. July 6th, don't care. I want to know what you're doing before the flood.
And seeded a cloud that dissipated after 2 hours, and then suspended all operations indefinitely because there was risk of flooding.
Okay. So he seeded a cloud. Just told us. 20 minutes using silver iodide. He'll explain it a little bit more, how much he used, all this stuff. By his own confession, he said, we spent 20 minutes seeding a cloud. Took us 20 minutes to do it, to get up to, again, he'll say how high, but 2,500 feet, 20 minutes. Disperse the silver iodide. And then the cloud dissipated within 2 hours. This is trickery. If you don't understand how it works, this company is not a cloud making company. It's a rain making company. So what happens when you have rain? Clouds turn to rain. Clouds are full of potential to have rain. Once they have rain, it pours and then the clouds disperse. So we're not disputing the idea that they saw a cloud dispersing, because again, he came in after the tropical storm Barry had actually moved across. So he's coming in after, and this is very important. He's not coming before the tropical storm Barry for our purpose. He's coming after. And then he said they spent 20 minutes dispersing the silver iodide, and then he saw a cloud dissipate. All right, let's continue.
And so after our 20-minute operation, which was flown at about 2,500 feet, where we only dispersed about 60 grams of silver iodide aerosol, we stopped operating, and those aerosols could not have persisted for the days that came afterwards. And
were you using the typical like ice flares, or were you using your proprietary system?
We were using silver iodide aerosol.
Okay, he didn't answer the question. He was asked, did you use ice flares? Ice flares are used in planes. Basically, they light up, they release the silver into a cloud. They look like little clouds being released behind the planes, and you can see it. You can actually see that being dispersed. That wasn't the question. The question was, are you using ice flares, the typical ice flares? He responded by saying, we use silver iodide. That's a different method. It's a different method. So he didn't directly answer the question, but we're going to back up a bit so you guys can hear it again.
Came afterwards, and
were you using the typical like ice flares, or were you using your proprietary?
He nods his head like yes, but he answers it with a different. He inserts a different answer, and that's what we're going to talk about a little bit later.
System.
We were using silver iodide aerosol.
Okay. Yeah. So it wasn't like the ice flares brand, flare sticks or anything like that.
We don't use ice critical engineering.
So he said we don't use ice critical engineering, which there is no such term. I think he tried to make it sound a little bit like he's coming across as a little bit smarter. And again, if you look up ice critical engineering, there's no such thing as that. But if he said we don't practice ice crystal engineering. That's a different, that is a term. So maybe he made a mistake and said, maybe he meant to say, we don't practice ice crystal engineering. His whole company is based on ice crystal engineering. That's what silver iodide does in clouds. It seeds it. It changes the molecular structure so it drops rain. So it's weird that he says we don't practice. That's not what Jim is asking you. He's asking if you're using the typical flares that are on airplanes to disperse the silver iodide, to disperse, to change the clouds so that they dump the rain. He said, we don't practice ice critical engineering. Again, no such thing. The difference is if you are using silver iodide, you're basically using this chemical in a drone, because they use drones, and you're putting it inside a drone. You go up to 2,500 feet and you disperse these silver iodides into the clouds. That's not the final stage. That is stage one. Stage one is putting it into the atmosphere so that if a future cloud comes or a future wind comes and picks it up like an updraft, once the temperature reaches optimum, then the silver iodine releases into the clouds what it's supposed to do, which is to bring rain. So this silver iodide could actually be released into the air and not be active, and this is important, for hours, days, until it hits the right atmosphere, the right temperature, the right cooling temperature, then it gets activated. So on one hand, he's right. There's no way once activated that it could remain in the air. It's because it becomes rain and it ends up on the earth. But silver iodide could remain in the air for hours, days. There's articles written by Israel, and Israel is top of the food chain when it comes to weather manipulation. I don't know if you guys knew that or not, but they are. They're very good at it. Top of the food chain when it comes to AI. Top of the food chain when it comes to drones. Top of the food chain when it comes to weather modification. They've written articles saying that there were times where they tried to modify the weather over certain crops and they missed. So hundreds of miles down, it rained. And then they took notes. This is the Israelis. They're like, oh, we missed it. We needed to back up a little bit more, or we needed more of the right temperature when we released these silver iodide for it to work, because we're missing our targets. And this is known. He knows this. He knows this. In order for you to make it rain, you don't stand over your target. You go in front of the target or behind the target, depending where the wind is. So if you know your target is 100 miles away, that's not where you set up base. You set up base 100 miles away. And then you launch your drone straight up. You release the crystal iodides, hoping that the updraft will take those crystals. And once it cools, it gets activated. Now you have a rainstorm. That's how it works. I don't know why he's dodging, but it's probably because his company's in trouble. Probably. All right, let's continue.
Okay. Cool.
All right, let me just go to the comments here to make sure everybody's with me so far. Sean Ryan, but I didn't watch it. Yeah, I watched some of it on Sean Ryan. He didn't ask the right questions that we're asking here. So we're going to get to the bottom of this. I think this will be more important than that video. I think this will be even more important than this video here, because I think what Jim was doing was putting this out there upline so people like myself or anyone else could come and watch the complete interview and listen to it and pay attention to what he's saying. So now we're going to start getting into where were you? This is so important. He said at the beginning, earlier in his interview, that we only help farmers when it comes to drought. We help them. Okay, that's not bad. That's not a bad thing to help farmers so that they can stay afloat. That's not a bad thing. So my question is, where were you before the flood? Not after the flood, not during the flood, before the flood. Where were you? We're going to get to this. I'm telling you, this is getting better.
So I'm going to give you guys a little visual of where we're talking about, just to, bring things home. So I went into Google Earth and I kind of overlaid this here. So you were down here on July 2nd.
Mm-hmm.
So this is 2 days in advance. Let me actually
remember, July 2nd is our magic date. That's what we're looking for. Where we don't care about July 3rd or July 4th because he said he wasn't there. Okay, let's take that off the books. It doesn't make any sense for him to be in Kerr, in the county of Kerr, or in Kerrville, or in any of these other towns during the flood. It makes zero sense. I believe him when he says he was not there on July 4th. I believe him. But I want to know why. Where were you on July 2nd?
Take this off the screen. That way it'll make it a little clearer for everybody. So on July 2nd, we're down here in Runge. You say, is that how you pronounce it?
Yep.
So down here in Runge, Texas, you're at about, you said 1,500 to 2,600 feet.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for those who don't understand, okay, if you're I don't know what the fuck a kilometer is because I'm an American. So you guys can do the math on that. For all my viewers in other countries, y'all can check that out. But specifically at 2,600 feet, you're talking about a very low residence time. What would you surmise that how long those chemicals would last in the atmosphere at 2,600 feet?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first thing to say, right, is that if you disperse about 60 grams of those, which we did, that's a pretty radically de minimis amount.
60 grams is not anything to shrug off. In 20 minutes, he released 60 grams. 5 grams is enough to create rain. So he said that 60 grams, it's not even worth it, basically. It's so dismissible. You can just dismiss it. It's insignificant. Okay, well, why were you 100 miles, arguably southeast of Kerr, the county of Kerr? Why were you south of the flood? Why were you there releasing something that is arguably dismissible? Why? Why there? Why were you there?
That amount of material, it would have a hard time even inducing precipitation in a single convective cumulus cell, let alone any large-scale system like what we saw in the succeeding days.
So the question will be, okay, if you're saying 60 grams, I'll just bring myself up here. 60 grams doesn't do anything. And I've read articles that say the normal amount, that's about average to the high end, 60 grams. 5 to 10 is normal. 5 to 10. 60 grams, it's not outside of the normal. 100 grams, you're now, it's like, what are you up to, kind of thing. Like that's a pretty high dose. But 40, 50 grams, that's good. That's enough to do its job. 30 grams, enough to do its job. He said 60. It's not a minor amount, is my point. That's a significant amount. It's not something that you just throw away. It's precise. Why didn't he use 50? Why not 70? Why 60? Why 2,500 feet? Why not 1,800 feet? Why not 3,000 feet? Why were you at a certain level? Those are questions that I wish Jim had asked him, but I know what he's trying to do here. He's trying to get some information. So let's continue.
At 2,600 feet, you're not going to get anything that persists in going around the globe, especially after precipitation. Those clouds dissipated about 2 hours after seeding, and then would be immeasurably small.
All right. So he just said something interesting. He said that when the iodide basically becomes active, you're not gonna see it around the globe, especially 2 days later. Why? Because it's done its job. Once it's active, it causes it to rain. Before that, and this is what Jim should have asked, he said, yeah, but how long do the silver iodides last? Well, again, I mentioned Israel has notes on it saying it could last days. They've proven that they've missed their targets to help farmers with their crops. They had to tweak it. The problem isn't the idea that it crystallized and then the clouds dissipated. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what happens if it doesn't crystallize or if it doesn't get active, meaning it has to hit the right temperature. If it doesn't hit the right temperature, it will continue and you'll miss your target. But he said that it was active, is what it sounded like. Within 2 hours, he saw the clouds dissipate, meaning it's raining. He's done his job. You don't stick around if you just see and again, you can't see the crystals, but the silver iodide, you can't see it. So you're not going to stick around unless you're waiting for something to happen. He said the cloud dissipated in 2 hours. That means he was there not for 20 minutes. That was the operation time, the flight of the drone to go up and down. He was there for 2 hours, or his company was there for 2 hours. Let's continue.
On inconsequential 2-3 hours after seeding.
Yeah, so I'm gonna just show the satellite for those who weren't there, didn't really catch what was going on. So for those who don't know, Tropical Storm Barry had already broken up over Mexico. This is the remnants of it we're seeing here. This is on, if you're on Earth.Null School, you can see right here. I have it up at 2200 local. That is, Eastern. I could throw UTC, but again, America. So as you can see, right here, I've got it, at 1,000 hectopascals. It's 1,000 millibars. It's roughly ground level. We're talking about a moisture flow going up from the north, from the southeast to the northwest. So this is the direction that the wind is blowing. And this, you can see, is total precipitable water. So
Tesla's stock is crashing. The headlines say Elon's empire is collapsing. But what if
this is just saying how much water was up there, and was this, a prime opportunity? Clearly, on the second, we're looking at a lot of water that, could be rained out, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. An ahistoric amount. It was like a 1 in 100 year flood.
Yeah. So then when we skip forward, now we're on the third, and then we're on the fourth. We're not. This is the third in the evening. Now you can see the wind has severely picked up compared. Okay. We're up to 18 kilometers. I don't, what's a kilometer? Miles per hour. So, if we just back up just a bit, we got 10 miles an hour, and they're all kind of all over the place. But then we get this, really quick picking up of all of the airs moving mostly north. And it's really pulling all of that water in that's going to rain out. And this is actually the third at around midnight. And then we get to the fourth. We're still seeing the same kind of, flow rates, Same thing over here on the Cocoras. If you actually, this is rainfall levels in the lakes and streams. This is right now I'm looking at on the 2nd. You can see down here in Brownsville, we got some reds. We've got a couple, we've got an orange right here. Still not very high, 2.10 inches, but when we go to the 3rd, you can see that we've got, some increased rainfall here.
Excuse me. All right. So what's going on here? We'll come back to this. I think what is important is to know that there was a tropical rainstorm, Barry, that moved across, going into Mexico, going in across the states as well, and dissipating. Okay, no argument there. Like, yeah, that makes sense. But what people are missing is, let me just use this Black Swan book for an example. Got to go right to left here. All right, so you have the storm here. This is Barry. Barry's going across into Mexico, and you have precipitation, water. As Barry is moving, it's drawing all the precipitation from the ocean. It's sucking it onto land. So if you were to be a rainmaker organization, ask yourself the question, do you want to be planted here to make it rain in the middle of Barry? Do you want to be before Barry? Or do you want to be after Barry? And before the rain, or before the precipitation starts getting sucked in onto land? I would submit to you, right where my pretty little face is, that's where you want to deploy silver iodide. You don't want to deploy it here. It's too late. And you don't want to deploy it into a storm. So what I will submit to you before the courts is Rainmaker was purposely planting itself after Tropical Storm Barry, because that's the best time to be right here before the precipitation gets pulled in. It's coming. The precipitation is being sucked in to the land of Texas. It's coming in from the Gulf. You want to be there on July 2nd, July 1st, early or late July 2nd. You want to be there because then when you launch your silver iodide, which it's going to remain dormant, inactive in the atmosphere until it reaches its critical temperature, which is a certain cool, I don't know what the temperature it has to be at, but it has to be cool enough that it will trigger it to activate, and then the rain comes down. But if you don't have rain, Rainmaker doesn't make rain out of nothing. That's not how it works. It doesn't make clouds. So this is, I think, where people get caught off guard. They think, oh, he's making a cloud. No, he's taking advantage of a normal phenomenon that when a hurricane moves through the Gulf and goes onto land, eventually it breaks up, but it's still spinning. And that spinning is displacing air, creating suction from the Gulf where all the precipitation is coming onto the land. And if you plant silver iodide just before it, that draft will bring it up. And when it turns to clouds and turns to rain, or just before that, it'll crystallize, and then more rain, and then boom, then it drops. And if you time it right, it'll be right above Kerr County within a day. So let's go back. Hopefully this is making sense. Yeah, basically the storm stalled too, which is interesting. Some people say for like 6 to 8 hours it just stalled, which is bizarro world. But in order to have the maximum amount of damage, if you will, you have to be after a tropical storm and before the precipitation is moving in, like heavy precipitation. That's the perfect place for you to be. And that's what Rainmaker is saying. He's saying, look, we were here on July 2nd for 20 minutes. 20 minutes only. Isn't that interesting? You were there. You weren't there before when Tropical Barry was there because you would have got decimated. And you're not going to be there after July 4th because that's the window of opportunity is over. You had to be there on July 2nd. Let's continue.
Here, clearly. But the 4th is when you actually start to see the flooding. And then followed up by the 5th. You know, this is the majority of the flooding occurred in this area right here. So some people would say, well, bro, dude, man, you know, you were here and all the flooding happened here and the wind was going this way. What's your reaction to that?
We were operating days in advance at sufficiently low altitudes such that that particulate, which again was like less than you could fit in the palm of your hand, would not have made it even that far north.
So what? The idea that you need handfuls of silver to make it rain is ridiculous. So now he's reducing it to the ridiculous. Look at this. 60 grams. Look at that. That hardly fits in my hand. This is weird. Like, no, this can't happen. There's not enough here for it to go over the whole globe. That's a straw man argument. I didn't ask you at all. Will it affect India or some other country? I'm asking you the question, why were you 100 miles southeast of Kerr County that got obliterated because of a flood? Why were you in this area where Barry, the tropical storm, had actually just left, and because you're a rainmaker that it actually draws in precipitation from the Gulf, and you planted the silver iodide. 60 grams, according to you, is enough to cause a mini tropical storm. You know that. Just read the articles. Read how much you actually need, and to reduce it to the ridiculous and say, it's not even a handful. It's so small. It's insignificant. You keep throwing those words out. If it was insignificant, a company wouldn't pay you to drop a payload of 60 grams. They wouldn't pay you that. So again, why were you there? Who paid you? What company? Why? Why there? It's already raining. If you're a rainmaker, you don't go to places where it's raining unless you know there's more precipitation coming in from the ocean, because you could see the draft produced from Tropical Storm Barry. Let's continue. And this company is only a year old. That's a good question. Who paid him? Why was he there? People don't do anything for free.
Over the course of 2 days, right? Like that amount of aerosol would have been immeasurable and entirely ineffective by the time that precipitation really did come in force from Tropical Storm Barry.
Okay, so now he's talking about Tropical Storm Barry. Like, again, he said 2 days after, the precipitation wouldn't be there because that's not how it works. And I agree with you. That's not how it works. Once it gets active, it's done within minutes. It's done. It's done its course. It did what it needed to do. So he's truthful in saying this is not going to last for 2 days. Yes, once it gets active, it's done. It's like saying, there's no way when you drop an atomic bomb on Hiroshima that explosion is going to remain for 2 days. It's going to continue exploding for 2 days. Duh. That's because the explosion happens and it's over. You could almost say that when the plane dropped the bomb, I forget what the plane was called, but bombers, I believe they used. When the plane dumped its payload, Fat Boy, I think it was one of them, the mission was over. They did their job. You can ask the question, how long did the mission take? Well, from the time I pushed the release button on the hatch to drop Fat Boy, that probably took about 5 minutes. Oh, so the mission took 5 minutes. Well, the planning took months. And we had to organize, and we had to make the bomb, and all this research, and we had to practice and all kinds of stuff. It took a long time. But to drop the payload, it took less than 5 minutes. Oh, okay. So that's what Augustus is saying. We only operated for 20 minutes. Yeah. You took your drone up in the air, released your payload of 60 grams of silver iodide, and then brought the drone back down, and then you observed. It's like, is this thing working? And then all of a sudden, July 3rd at 1 a.m., you get flood warnings, and you're like, we've done our job. Let's pack our bags, everyone. Let's go home. It's working. 24 hours later, bam, flood. Already people screaming at 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. By the time news outlets get it, it's too late. There's already a surge of 20 to 30 foot waves. 10 o'clock that night, nobody's like paying attention. 11 o'clock, nothing. All of a sudden, 12 o'clock, 12:30, 1 o'clock. By 4 or 5 o'clock, it was over. The nightmare was just beginning because people were waking up all over the place. And isn't it funny that not one news outlet covered the flood during the flood? They didn't even come in 2 hours later, 3 hours later. They started coming in on July 4th to like later in the day to start covering this stuff. And they didn't release anything till July 5th on a Saturday. Why? Why didn't you try and tell people that day on July 4th? Well, because it's festive. You don't want to wreck the mood. That's a huge problem. That's a huge problem. Again, look it up. All you see today is all about after the fact. You don't see anything leading up to it, which is horrible. Horrible. Let's continue.
Yeah, and I'm going to do a real quick measurement on this to give people an idea. If I'm looking at the map right now, just to give you guys an idea, because I'm one of them nerds. Okay, we're talking about 108 miles.
This is Pod 5, the first fully immersive sleep system. Intelligent.
Roughly. And the flooding actually occurred up here, and then it ran down the streams to accumulate at Lake Travis. So we're actually talking, roughly 150 miles up to Mason.
So this is why I say Jim is a brilliant interviewer. He's kind of baiting he's kind of baiting Augustus because he's almost, I don't want to say downplaying, but look, it's like, hey, that's 100 miles away. It's 150 miles away. There's no way you could have affected that. And then Augustus could say, yeah, that's right. There's no way I could do it. And here's why, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, you're actually incriminating yourself by telling us where you were before, because the notes are going to come out. I think the organization is NOAHA or NOAA, something like that, NOAA. They have to report, like companies like Rainmaker have to report where they were. I don't think they have to report who paid them, but they have to report where they were, why they were there, what the reason was, all this kind of stuff. And that's going to be coming out in the next couple of weeks. The public can actually have access to that. And I'll pay attention to that because I want to read the report. I would like to know who paid you to go over to this area after Tropical Barry came through. Who paid you? and why were you there, all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of interesting to me, again, how Jim is interviewing this guy, because again, he is not for weather modification. And I know Augustus poses an argument and says, God put us on the earth, so he put us in charge of everything. Why can't we manipulate the weather as well? Well, you're kind of crossing over, because we know in Revelation that God uses the weather to punish, almost like a weapon in itself, punish nations that don't submit under Jesus Christ's authority, and the Antichrist gets pummeled. So now we're tampering with weather and saying we're doing it for the benefit, but why were you there when there was no drought? It's one thing if you're in the middle of a desert and you're like, hey, there's some clouds forming, let's activate, let's bring more rain. That's one thing. But you're arriving after a tropical storm, which produced a ton of rain. You're coming after, and you know that precipitation is coming in from the Gulf. You know this. You plan this. Nobody just shows up and goes, oh, hey, we just happened to be here after Tropical Barry left. We just happened to be here before precipitation is coming in. We just happened to be 100, 150 miles south of where a 1 in 100 year flood. We've never had a flood like this. Yeah, it's because we've never had an organization like Rainmaker within 100 miles of the worst flood in the history of this area. Crazy. All right, let's continue.
So I don't see how something at 2,600 feet is going to make it, or, even with convection, lifting, let's say what do you say, 50 milligrams?
50 to 65 grams.
Yeah. So 65 grams of chemical.
So now it's 65 grams. You said 60. Now Jim baited you a little bit by saying, what did we say, 50 to 65 grams? And then Augustus comes clean and goes 65 grams. I don't know if that's the accurate number, but it's interesting that he started with 60 and now he's moving up. 5 grams is different. It's substantial when you can get away with 5 to 10 grams. So now it's 65 grams. Is it 70? Can I hear an 80? Can I hear a 90? What is the actual truth? Did you fly your drone more than one time? Is it 60 grams per drone times 4 drones? How many drones did you use on July 2nd? That's what I would ask. How many drones did you use in that area on July 1st? When did you arrive in Rungi? When did you arrive there? Oh, we arrived June 30th. You were there for 4 days building a camp. I don't know if he was there June 30th, but I'm just saying chances are likely that this was scheduled ahead of time. I'm banking a lot on this idea that organizations like this have clients that say, could you come out on this day because we need you here. I don't think Rainmaker operates random, like we're just going to show up in this town and we're going to release silver into the air because nothing would happen, because there's no clouds, there's nothing. So it would be a waste of money, resources to drive all the way out there and release silver. It would be a waste of time. So they have to schedule this and say, well, the only time that we can come is a week or so after Tropical Barry leaves that area. Then we can come in and make it rain. Oh, okay. They don't just happen to be here. They plan to be there for a reason, and it's off the coast of the Gulf.
even if there was major convection that was all thrown way up into the air, that still seems highly unlikely to cause the. I read somewhere like 20 something inches of rain in a day. Like,
not just highly unlikely, Jim. Like physically impossible.
It's like statistically impossible.
I love this because, again, Jim is probably one of the more knowledgeable people when it comes to weather modification. And I know he's read articles on what happens after silver iodide becomes active, meaning it's in a properly it's in a proper atmosphere, it's in a proper temperature to be active. Then yes, I would agree. I would go, yeah, it's impossible for it to go around the globe or this way, depending how you think, this way or this way. It's impossible. Yes, because it's raining. You activated. Now it's raining. However, I would submit to you that as silver iodide, before it becomes active, could remain in the air for hours, if not days, if not weeks. And that would give it time to go hundreds and hundreds of miles. But it's going to be virtually traceless because you can't see it, smell it, taste it, whatever. And it's silver iodide. So you're not going to you're not going to find 60 grams dispersed into the atmosphere. And once it starts raining, it goes into the ground. It's spread out over hundreds of acres, thousands of acres. So yes, I agree with Augustus and Jim. Once activated, it's going to go into the ground because it's raining. Rain goes to the ground. It doesn't stay in the air forever. And this is the little sleight of hand to say, oh yeah, it's impossible for it, once active, to go around the globe. Yes, I agree with you. I'm on your side. Once it rains, those raindrops will not go around the world. It hits the soil. Yes. But what you're not sharing is the idea that before it gets active, after it gets released by a drone, it could hover for hours, days, weeks. And there's article after article. Israel's talked about it. This is why we missed our mark. We're supposed to drop it here, but then we found it rained 200 miles away or whatever it was. We missed. That means it was not active for hundreds of miles. And then it hit the right condition and then it activated. This is why it's hard to predict weather. Even coming in from the mountains, you can go, oh yeah, you know what? It's going to snow at this time in this area. And then by the time it gets to you, it's done. There's no snow. It just turns to rain or whatever it is. And they miss it, or the clouds move over and they dissipate, whatever it is. It's hard to predict. So what this company is doing is actually predicting the precipitation coming off the Gulf. They're not paying attention to any of the clouds that are already leaving the area. It's what's coming in. Let's continue.
This is and for the haters, because I know you're going to come at me, bro. I don't, facts do not give a fuck about your feelings on this one. So for anybody who wants to hate on Jim Lee for, talking to a weather modification guy, you guys know how I feel about weather modification. Augustus knows how I feel about it. I freaking hate 99% of weather modification people. Why? Because they lie, cheat, steal, they obfuscate. Hell, I've called Weather Modification Incorporated and ice flares, asked them for material safety data sheets, flight plans, things like that. They just hang up on you. They won't have a conversation.
So isn't it interesting? Jim says, I hate weather modification companies, and he has the king of the weather modification company, Rainmaker, right there. So again, He's playing both sides because he wants to bait Augustus into singing like a canary. So he has to say this. But a leopard doesn't change its spots in one interview. He has articles for arguably 12 to 15 years going, these guys lie to me. They're corrupt. They make up stories. They never tell the truth, all this stuff. So he's basically saying, I know you guys are going to hate, meaning his own people, because he's interviewing a person that he has come across, like organizations. He's like, don't hate on me, but facts don't lie and all this stuff. And I get it. He has to say that. And he's telling the truth. Facts don't lie. Like, if the silver iodide gets active, it's not going to go all over the globe. I agree with you. That's a fact. But what is also a fact is if it doesn't get active, it's going to move through the atmosphere for miles and last for hours, if not days, if not weeks in the atmosphere. And it could just disperse. It could just land somewhere else and you'll never know, you'll never detect it, whatever. Because again, it's only just a little tiny hand. It's like not even a handful. It's just 60 grams. That's why it makes it hard to trace. So the only way to trace these people is to ask them, where were you on this certain day? Why were you there? What time were you there from? Who paid you? Why did they pay you? What was their goal? Did you achieve your goal? Did you receive payment after you achieved your goal? Do you receive payment if you don't achieve your goal? These are questions that are going to come out later. I'm assuming if any of this, if anybody watches this video in the US and goes, you know what? Thanks to the Black Swan, we're going to revisit Rainmaker. We're going to bring him in for questioning because we don't want this stuff to go on again and again and again. We don't want this. We don't want tropical C, tropical D, tropical E, F, G, H. We're just getting into it. That's how they have an alphabet. I forget what the first one was. A, Albert, I don't know. B, Barry, what's C, then D. So I would create a plan to be able to document all this stuff and to be able to revisit it later and say, where were you? We had a massive flood here. Where was your organization? Because you guys are good at making it rain. So I need to know this stuff. I think that's fair for the public. I think that's fair.
You got big balls, my man. So kudos for that. And you've been pretty damn transparent.
Well, I mean, I appreciate that. And, you know, where it's coming from my perspective is like, I live in California. I used to live in Texas. I've seen firsthand what happens when farmers run out of water, right? Like I've been to Salt Lake City and I can see how far the lake has receded and all of the dead birds along the lake bed because there isn't enough water there, right? Like I've heard stories of people in Phoenix, Arizona getting their water shut off at their houses because there's not enough there. And so if there is a way for us to produce more water and we can scientifically show where it's happening, what the effect is, that the materials that we're using are entirely safe, then I think that we should be doing that for the sake of those farms and ecosystems and residences. And people, rightfully so, ask questions about what the consequences are, what materials you're using, if it's safe. And if I was being discreet or clandestine about this, then it would just make people more skeptical. And so I'm persistently trying to be as transparent as possible. But I also don't think it should just be me proactively being communicative about what we're doing. Like, I think that the fact that we haven't had an update to our weather modification regulations in the United States in decades is ridiculous, right? Like, we should absolutely have more transparent reporting requirements from the federal agencies. We should have approved materials lists. We should have approved concepts of operations. We should require that you have certified meteorologists on staff. So it's not just anybody that is allowed to do this. And I think that certain states do have pretty good permitting and regulatory structures right now, but the federal government should absolutely be involved.
This is interesting that he says this. And I think Augustus is saying this to make his organization appear to be transparent. But I think there was a case, I wish I looked this up before, but I believe somewhere in Texas, he appeared before a hearing saying that he opposes the banning of weather modification, geoengineering. He opposes the idea that they would ban it. Obviously, he is a company that makes it rain. So it makes sense that he would say that. Now he's saying, I'm all for regulations with the government, which to me sounds a little weird because now they're going to be all over you to ask you how you operate and all this kind of stuff. I don't know. I think it's kind of a weird thing. It's almost like you're incriminating yourself in some ways because of your track history of saying, I oppose all this stuff. I don't want any government putting their hands in on what we're doing in the private sector or the public sector or whatever. And I think most Americans would agree with this guy from the perspective of, we don't want the government having their hands in this stuff, because once they get a hold of what you're actually doing, sometimes they do it for their own best interest, and you don't always want that stuff. All right, so let's continue. Let's continue here.
So this is something that we previously discussed in an X space. And I knew inherently that you would say yes to this. And I think that a lot of your competitors, Northern, what is it? Western Weather Consultants, Desert Research Institute. These guys don't want to talk about this sort of stuff. Like they want to make their money. Idaho Power Company. They want to make their money. They want to have their little, cut out and make sure that, they keep making claims and then not having to prove that they did a damn thing. I do think that you have a very novel approach, with the dual polarization radar at looking at the structure of water versus ice. Great interview. What's the guy's name? Sean Ryan. Pretty good interview on there. It probably, I would ask a lot of questions that Sean didn't. Let's be specific about that. But still pretty, awesome.
All right. So that's enough for that. Well, I would encourage you guys to watch the rest because it's like an hour and a half interview. But I think we have enough to basically, what I would do probably is look up some of these other organizations, all this kind of stuff, and figure out what's actually going on. But it's pretty clear that Rainmaker was in the area before. And I would wait, or I would look forward to seeing the public report saying what it is they were exactly doing. Because if it's already raining, why do you need to be there? If there's precipitation coming in off the Gulf, why do you need to be in that exact area when arguably within 24 hours, a whole county was decimated? Several counties were decimated. It's too much of a coincidence. Too much of a coincidence. All right. Yeah, and I think that's a good point from New Hampshire Homes, is people are nonchalant with some of this stuff when it comes to some of the organizations that are actually manipulating weather. They're like, yeah, well, I got paid. What's the big deal? And they just treat it like it's nothing. This is probably why I've been spending a little bit more time on this, because this is not nothing. This is not just, oh, this just happens. This just happens. There's too many things that line up. And I'm actually shocked that Rainmaker would be on an interview to say, yes, I was here and here and here. But I think he's getting a lot of heat. And people are going to be looking for organizations to blame. And he could be the front of the line. So maybe he's trying to clear his name before that wave, before that surge of hate. I'm not encouraging anybody to hate on someone, but if a company is doing this stuff on purpose and they know what they're doing, I don't know, man. There needs to be some kind of accountability, fines, whatever it is, letters of apology. Like, how do you even make up for this? There's like over 90 people dead now. Somebody's going to be looking for answers, is all I'm saying. They're going to be pointing fingers, probably pointing fingers at the government, probably pointing fingers at the news media outlet. Why weren't we warned? With all the technology that we have, Elon's launching satellites every single day. You can't warn us within 24 hours of arguably the worst flood in 100 years. Why are we paying you guys to protect us, to let us know? Why are we dumping money into our governments if they don't have our best back? If you're busy celebrating the 4th of July somewhere else, meanwhile your county is being decimated because you had to go to the White House to watch Donald Trump release his big bill, big, better, badder bill, and watch a B-2 bomber fly overhead with fighter planes. That was more important to your senator, to your governor, whoever is responsible for that area. That was more important to get ready for the 4th of July than to warn its inhabitants, the people that live in that area, live along the river, all along the river of Junction Highway. You couldn't warn them. You couldn't say, hey, Junction Highway is going to be closed because there's too much water. You better leave now. You better leave now. But they didn't. No warnings. And I think that's what people are getting upset about, is the fact that if you knew this was coming in, why didn't you warn us? And if you didn't warn us, what does that say about future events? What else are you not going to warn us about until it's too late? That's the problem. That's the problem I have. When you pay a government to warn you, you pay the police so that they can say, hey, there are bad actors in this neighborhood, in this city, in this area, and they don't let you know, and you get hurt, you get robbed, whatever it is. I think that's a crime in itself. If you walk into a grocery store and you see someone steal something and you don't say anything, you are now an accomplice. Yeah, but I watched them steal. I didn't steal it, but you watched them get into the car and you're not willing to tell us what car they drove away in. You're now an accomplice, meaning you could almost be equally responsible because you watched it happen and you said nothing. So if you are in the area of the Kerr County and you know this is going on, or Rungi, and you know Rainmaker was in that area, I think you have a responsibility to tell the area that you live in, whoever the leaders are, whoever's responsible, that, hey, I saw these organizations here. And I want them to be more accountable by what they're doing. I want to know what they're putting into the atmosphere. I would like to know, is it 60 grams or is it 65 grams? And why not put 5 grams of silver? Why not put 100 grams? Oh, 100's too much. That would cause a hurricane. Okay, but 60? Well, that's a lot too, but I'm trying. It's only a handful. It's just a handful. Well, it. Do you know how big an atom is? Do you know what happens when you split an atom? You can't even put that in your hand. So don't diminish what we're saying. It's more important to be more accountable because people are dying. People are losing their lives over this kind of thing. And to put it underneath the carpet and just say, no, nothing to see here. This is just how storms happen. Well, there's billions of dollars being spent on this technology. Why is Israel spending so much money? I would suggest probably Ukraine. I haven't looked it up yet. I'm sure they're in it as well. I'm sure there's other countries that are spending a ton of money. France, one of them. into modifying weather. This is a thing, and it's been around since the 40s, but we're only hearing about it now. And they'll say, oh no, that's just a natural phenomenon. This is just what happens. Really? Really? That's what happens? Then why don't you just let it play out? Then why hire all these rain-making organizations? Why hire them to make it rain if it just naturally will rain? What are you afraid of? Anyways, I hope this makes sense. It's not easy being a black swan, talking about this kind of stuff, and I don't like pointing fingers and stuff, but sometimes if it walks like a swan, squawks like a swan, flies like a swan, it could be a black swan event. It could be a black swan event. So hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you guys in another video. Ciao for now. I think I'm on Uptime Community Church tonight. I think I got an invite, so I'll see you guys later tonight. Have a fantastic day, and we'll talk to you later. Bye for now.
Black Swan Revelations here on YouTube brought you today's mind-bending journey. Dive into the discussion, your comments, questions, prayer requests, and powerful testimonies of Jesus' love are what fueled this community. Did today's episode hit home? Smash that like button. New here? Subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a live stream or a video upload. Thanks for being part of today's adventure. Catch you in the next video, or maybe even in the clouds. Stay curious, stay blessed.